Every rush hour, a 100-year-old yellow tram grinds up a hill through Alfama, standing room only, tourists filming out the window while commuters brace against each turn. Tram 28 is one of the most photographed things in Lisbon. It is also, in a strange way, a preview of the entire city, full, in demand, and increasingly disconnected from the people who actually live along its route. Lisbon spent the last decade becoming one of Europe's most recommended cities, for retirees chasing sun and low taxes, for remote workers chasing a lower cost of base, for digital nomad visa applicants comparing spreadsheets of minimum income thresholds. The recommendations were not wrong, exactly. They were just written from one side of the ledger. This episode works through the other side too, what it actually costs to rent, to buy, to get a doctor's appointment, to get a residency permit, and to get to work, for two different people living in the same city. A Portuguese resident earning a Portuguese salary, and a foreign remote worker earning euros or dollars from somewhere else, competing for the same apartments. Start with the local side of the ledger. According to Statistics Portugal, average gross monthly earnings across the country reached €1,741 in the second quarter of 2025, including holiday and Christmas bonuses folded into a monthly equivalent. Lisbon sits well above the national figure. One INE-based estimate puts the Grande Lisboa average at around €2,215 gross per month, the highest of any region in the country. That figure moves depending on who is counting and what is included. Other sources, using different baskets of data, put the Lisbon average closer to €1,705 gross, or an average net figure around €977 a month once taxes and social security are removed. These numbers do not all describe the same thing. Some are total earnings including bonuses, some are regular monthly pay only, some are net, and some are gross. So this episode flags the range rather than picking one number to stand in for all of Lisbon. National minimum wage in 2026 is €920 a month gross, paid across 14 installments a year for an annual total of €12,880. After tax and social security, that leaves roughly €819 net in hand each month. A meaningful share of Lisbon's workforce, hospitality, retail, care work, sits much closer to that minimum than to any of the averages above. Now the other side of the ledger. Portugal's Digital Nomad Visa, formerly the D8, requires proof of foreign income of at least €3,680 a month for 2026, 4 times the national minimum wage by design. That is the visa floor, not a typical income. Most successful applicants earn well above it. It means the baseline foreign remote worker moving to Lisbon on this visa is arriving with a guaranteed income roughly double the city's average local salary and 4 times the national minimum wage. Both sides are shopping in the same rental market. As of May 2026, Idealista's listing data puts the average asking rent in Lisbon at €21.8 per square meter. On that basis, a 45 square meter apartment lists around €981 a month, and a standard 85 square meter flat lists around €1,853 a month. Other trackers, blending asking prices with signed lease data from Statistics Portugal, estimate the gap between what landlords list and what tenants actually sign at roughly 25 to 30%. Asking rents run near €23 per square meter, contracted rents closer to 16.50. By apartment type, the numbers climb in a fairly predictable order. A room in a shared flat starts around €350 a month in the suburbs and reaches €550 to €850 in central neighborhoods. A studio averages around €900, ranging from $750 in outer areas to $1,200 in renovated central buildings. A one-bedroom, locally called AT1, averages around €1,250, with a typical range of $1,000 to $1,700. A two-bedroom averages close to €1,850. A three-bedroom, or T3, runs anywhere from €1,720 to €2,580, depending on location and condition. District matters more than citywide averages suggest. Within Lisbon, the most expensive districts in May 2026 were Santo Antonio, at €27.2 per square meter, and Misericordia, at €25.0. The cheapest were Santa Clara, at 15.3 euros per square meter, and Lumiere at 16.6. Nearly a 2-to-1 spread across a city that fits comfortably inside a 30-minute metro ride end to end. For the local side of the ledger, the math gets tight fast. TradingPedia's affordability analysis, built on a furnished 45 square meter studio, including utilities and internet, finds that rent alone consumes more than 91% of the average local salary before food, transport, or anything else is paid for. The same analysis estimates that a single person needs more than 1,631 euros net a month just to move past covering bare essentials, a threshold that sits above what many of the salary figures cited earlier actually deliver. One side, a Lisbon resident on the city's average net salary, spending the better part of it on rent before groceries are even on the table. The other side, a D8 visa holder whose minimum qualifying income of 3,680 euros a month already clears a one-bedroom apartment in almost any district, with room left over. Neither side is doing anything wrong. They are simply bidding in the same 19-square-kilometer rental market with structurally different starting numbers. Buying tells a similar story, with bigger numbers attached. INE's Q4 2025 transaction data, actual closed sales, not asking prices, puts the average price per square meter in Lisbon at 5,198 euros. Idealista's May 2026 asking price data runs higher, at 6,124 euros per square meter, reflecting what sellers list online rather than what buyers ultimately pay. A separate market tracker estimates the typical paid price closer to 5,500 euros per square meter and the current asking level closer to 6,100. By property type, one estimate for the first half of 2026 puts standard apartments at an average of 600,000 euros, newer premium apartments at 850,000, townhouses at 900,000, penthouses at 1,600,000, and villas at 2 million. Apartments make up roughly 3/4 of Lisbon's housing stock, so that first figure, 600,000 euros for a standard apartment, is the one most relevant to most buyers. A separate median price estimate for June 2026 puts the citywide median apartment sale at around 480,000 euros, with an average closer to 620,000. These describe overlapping but not identical baskets of listings, so they are presented here as a range rather than a single fixed price. Entry-level buying starts around 170,000 to 250,000 euros, typically a small studio or one-bedroom in outer parishes like Santa Clara. On top of the purchase price, buyers should budget an additional 7 to 10% for transfer tax, stamp duty, and legal fees. For 80% of residential transactions closed in Lisbon in 2026, the final price fell somewhere between roughly 250,000 and 850,000 euros. For anyone weighing Lisbon as a rental investment rather than a home, One Tracker's May 2026 figures show the average sale price at 599,900 euros against an average monthly rent of 1,800 euros, holding steady both month-on-month and year-on-year, a gross yield of about 4.01%. Broken down by unit size, a median one-bedroom shows a 4.33% yield, the highest of the sizes tracked. A median 4+ bedroom shows 4.01%, the lowest. In plain terms, a median Lisbon property would take roughly 28 years of gross rent to pay for itself, and prices have kept climbing faster than rents have. For most Lisbon residents earning a local salary, the buy versus rent decision has effectively already been made for them. With standard apartments averaging around 600,000 euros and a typical local household earning well under a tenth of that annually, mortgage qualification is the binding constraint long before personal preference enters the picture. Renting is not a lifestyle choice for most local residents at this point. It is the only door still open, which is part of why rental demand and rental prices keep climbing even as sale prices do the same. Zoom out to the household level, and the picture does not improve much. Using 2 average local salaries as a household benchmark, a reasonable stand-in for a working couple, almost all combined income gets absorbed by basic monthly costs, leaving little room for saving. Portuguese house prices have risen roughly twice as fast as wages since 2019, which is the structural reason the math keeps getting harder rather than easier for people paid in local currency. Day-to-day living costs sit on top of rent. And here the sources converge more than they diverge. Estimates for a single person's monthly expenses, excluding rent, cluster in a range of roughly 700 to 750 euros. One tracker lands at 736 euros, another at 750. A family of four, also excluding rent, lands around 2,700 euros a month. These figures cover groceries, utilities, transport, and modest dining out, and they apply the same way regardless of which side of the two economy line a household sits on. Utilities for a typical 85 square meter apartment, electricity, water, heating, cooling, and garbage collection, run somewhere between about 115 and 180 euros a month, depending on usage and which tracker is consulted. Numbio's figure sits near 150 to 153 euros. Home internet at 60 megabits or faster averages around 33 to 36 euros a month. A prepaid mobile plan with roughly 10 gigabytes of data runs about 19 euros. Lisbon's mild climate keeps heating costs low for most of the year, which is part of why utility bills here trend lower than in northern European cities of comparable size. Groceries for one person run roughly 230 to 320 euros a month, depending on diet and brand choices. A broader national estimate puts a comparable basket closer to 300 euros. Basic items stay cheap by regional standards. A liter of milk around 0.92 to 0.98 euros, a 500-gram loaf of bread around 1.40 to 1.51 euros. Eating out adds another layer. A simple meal at a traditional Tosca runs 10 to 13 euros including a drink, while dining out regularly, twice a week at mid-range restaurants, adds roughly 300 to 500 euros a month to the budget. Stack rent, groceries, utilities, and modest dining together, and most single-person budgets in Lisbon land somewhere between 1,700 and 3,000 euros a month, depending on neighborhood and lifestyle. While a family of four renting a mid-range three-bedroom apartment typically needs 3,800 to 4,300 euros a month for a comfortable, non-luxury budget. For comparison, Lisbon runs about 14% more expensive than Porto overall once rent is factored in. A gap that pushes a share of both local workers and budget-conscious remote workers toward Portugal's second city instead. One cost line appears almost exclusively on the remote worker side of the ledger: co-working space. A desk in a Lisbon co-working space runs around 20 euros a day or roughly 150 euros a month, a cost that barely registers in most local household budgets, since the large majority of Portuguese residents work from an employer's premises rather than paying for their own workspace. It is a small line item next to rent, but it is a useful marker of just how differently the two populations structure their monthly spending. The pressure this creates is visible on the ground, not just in spreadsheets. Lisbon's population has grown by roughly 13,660 people in the past year alone, a modest 0.45% uptick that nonetheless adds steady demand to an already tight housing stock. Neighborhoods like Alfama and Moreira, the same historic quarters that give Tram 28 its scenery, have seen long-term residents priced out of buildings their families occupied for generations, replaced by short-term rentals and renovated flats aimed squarely at higher earners, local and foreign alike. Getting around the city is where the two economies briefly meet on equal footing. Everyone pays the same fare table. Lisbon's public transport runs on a rechargeable smart card called Navigant, which costs 0.50 euros and stays valid for a year once purchased at any metro station. The card can be loaded with pay-as-you-go credit, called zapping, in amounts from 3 to 40 euros, or with a fixed monthly pass. A single ticket validated on the metro includes 60 minutes of free transfers across the Caris bus, tram, and lift network, though re-entering the metro itself is allowed only once per ticket. For occasional riders, a single Caris or metro ticket loaded on the Navigant card costs 1.90 euros as of January 2026. Paying with zapping credit brings it down to 1.72 euros. Tapping a contactless bank card directly at the gate costs 1.92 euros, but works only within the metro and bus network. A 24-hour pass covering Caris and the metro costs 7.25 euros, extending that to include the Transtegio ferry to Cacilhas costs 10.35 euros, extending it further to include CP suburban trains to Sintra Cascais, and a Zambuli costs €11.40. For residents commuting daily, the monthly pass is where the system turns into an actual bargain. Navigant Municipal, valid within Lisbon, Amadora, or Odivelas, costs €30 a month. Navigant Metropolitano, valid across the wider Lisbon metropolitan area including Oeiras, costs €40 a month. And, unusually, both suburban CP trains to Sintra and Cascais are included on the same card, no separate ticket required. Riders who commute daily typically break even against pay-as-you-go pricing somewhere around 16 to 20 rides a month, which most working commutes clear within the first 2 weeks. Residents over 65 with a Lisbon tax address ride free under a municipal measure introduced in 2022, and reduced fares exist for people under 18 and under 23. For remote workers on a D8 visa, none of this changes. The fare table does not check income or visa type. Getting to work by tram, metro, or bus is one of the few costs in this city that does not scale with which side of the two economy line a resident falls on. The network itself is compact by capital city standards. For metro lines, red, blue, green, and yellow cover the city's core, with the red line running a direct connection to Humberto Delgado Airport, making Lisbon one of the easier European capitals to arrive in without a taxi already budgeted. Above ground, the historic tram network, including Tram 28, runs on the same fare system as the metro and buses, so a single Navigant card genuinely covers a resident's entire daily commute regardless of which vehicle gets them there. Driving is the other option, though most residents of either economy tend to avoid it inside the city center. Gasoline runs around €1.87 a liter, and many of Portugal's motorways charge tolls for longer trips. Parking in central Lisbon is scarce and metered in most tourist-adjacent districts, and the historic hill streets that make the city photogenic are often too narrow for comfortable daily driving. For most locals and most remote workers alike, a car ends up being a weekend tool for reaching the coast or the countryside, not a daily commuting choice. One of the few lifestyle decisions in Lisbon that does not split cleanly along income lines. Healthcare splits along a sharper line. Portugal's Serviço Nacional de Saúde, the SNS, is the public system funded through taxes and available to all legal residents once they register at a local health center and obtain an SNS user number. It covers core services for essentially the entire resident population, a coverage rate that sits above the OECD average. Costs inside the SNS are low. Small co-payments apply to some services, typically in a range of about €4 to €18 per visit, though many groups, including children and seniors, are exempt from these entirely. One estimate puts a basic GP consultation at around €5. The trade-off is wait times. Specialist appointments can take longer to secure than in a private clinic, and English language service is more consistently available in Lisbon, Porto, and the Algarve than elsewhere in the country. Private health insurance runs in 3 rough tiers. Basic plans cost around €25 to €60 a month. Comprehensive plans run €80 to €150. Premium international plans, aimed at older applicants or those with pre-existing conditions, run €150 to €300 or more. A private GP visit paid out of pocket typically costs €50 to €100. A specialist consultation runs €80 to €150. A hospital stay runs roughly €250 to €500 per night. This is where the two economy line becomes explicit. D7 and D8 visa applicants must show proof of private health insurance before their visa is even approved, because they do not yet qualify for the SNS. That access only opens up after the residence permit is issued and SNS registration is complete. A local resident, meanwhile, is typically covered by the public system from birth, often supplementing it with a modest private plan mainly for speed and convenience, not because the public option is unavailable. So a foreign remote worker's first year in Lisbon typically runs on private insurance by legal requirement, then may add SNS access once residency clears, layering a cost that a lifelong local resident never has to budget for in the same way. The wait time gap deserves its own mention, since it shapes daily decisions more than the price list does. Non-urgent specialist appointments through the SNS can take weeks to months to secure, depending on the specialty and region, which is the single most common reason cited by residents. local and foreign alike, for carrying at least a modest private plan even after SNS registration is complete. Private clinics in Lisbon, Porto, and the Algarve generally offer same-week or even same-day appointments at the price points already outlined, which is less a statement about the quality of Portuguese public medicine and more a statement about capacity relative to demand in a fast-growing capital. None of this housing or healthcare math matters to a prospective mover until the residency question is settled, and that question runs through two visa categories that are frequently confused with each other. The D7 visa, sometimes called the passive income visa, was designed for retirees and people living off pensions, dividends, rental income, or royalties, not active salaried work. For 2026, the minimum reference income is tied directly to the national minimum wage, €920 a month, or €11,040 a year for the main applicant. The thresholds climb in a fixed, predictable order for each added family member. A dependent spouse adds 50% of the base amount, about €460 a month, or €5,520 a year. A dependent child adds 30%, about €276 a month, or €3,312 a year. On top of the income test, applicants are generally expected to hold savings equal to roughly 12 months of the required income in a Portuguese bank account. €11,040 for a single applicant, €16,560 for a couple. The D8 visa, the Digital Nomad Visa proper, is aimed at remote employees, freelancers, and business owners earning from clients or employers outside Portugal. The minimum monthly income requirement is 4 times the national minimum wage, €3,680 for 2026, and that figure does not change when family members are added to the same application. Savings requirements mirror the D7, roughly €11,040 held in reserve, plus an additional 50% per adult, dependent, and 30% per child. Practical friction has grown around both categories. Due to a processing backlog at AIMA, the agency handling immigration and asylum, D8 processing times had stretched to roughly 6 to 9 months as of June 2026. Applicants typically need a Portuguese tax number, a local bank account, and proof of accommodation in place before the residence permit stage even begins. The line between the two visas has also hardened. Consulates are increasingly rejecting D7 applications where the underlying income turns out to be active salaried work rather than genuinely passive income, pushing remote employees and freelancers firmly toward the D8 track instead. Several immigration advisors now describe the D7 as effectively reserved for retirees and D8 as the default route for anyone earning through ongoing work, however remote. The application process itself has a fixed order regardless of which visa track an applicant takes. First comes a Portuguese tax number, the NAF, usually arranged through a local tax representative before arrival. Next comes a Portuguese bank account, into which the required savings buffer gets deposited. Then comes proof of accommodation, whether a signed lease or a property deed. Only once those pieces are in place does the consulate appointment happen, followed by the residence permit stage handled by AIMA after arrival in Portugal. Securing the lease and opening the account alone typically takes 3 to 4 weeks. Consulate processing adds another 60 to 90 days on top of that. For a remote worker who does not qualify for IFAC's narrow list of scientific, research, or innovation roles, the tax picture in practice looks like this: Portuguese source, and, in many cases, foreign source income gets taxed under the standard progressive IRS brackets, which climb from around 13.25% on the lowest slice of income up to 48% at the top end, applied marginally rather than as a flat rate on the whole income. That is a materially different starting position than the flat 20% rate INCHAR offered before 2025. One more way in which arriving today, rather than 5 years ago, changes the underlying financial calculation for a foreign remote worker weighing Lisbon against other cities. A separate pathway worth flagging, though outside the scope of the D7 and D8 comparison, is the Golden Visa, a residency by investment route requiring a fund investment starting around €500,000 rather than proof of monthly income. It serves a different population than the remote workers and retirees this episode focuses on, but it draws from the same broader pool of foreign capital that shapes Lisbon's property market. and it is worth knowing it exists as a third track alongside D7 and D8. Tax treatment adds one more layer that changed significantly and recently. The non-habitual resident regime, NCHR, which for over a decade offered new arrivals a flat 20% rate on qualifying Portuguese income and broad exemptions on foreign source income, closed to new applicants at the end of 2024, with a transition window that ran through March 2025. Anyone who registered before the cutoff keeps their original 10-year benefits. Everyone arriving now starts from a different set of rules. The replacement, known as IFSC or informally as NCHR 2.0, is considerably narrower. It offers a flat 20% rate on Portuguese source income and broad foreign income exemptions, but only for applicants working in specific fields, scientific research, innovation, and related high-skill sectors, generally requiring a university-level qualification. A remote marketing consultant or customer support freelancer moving to Lisbon on a D8 visa today is unlikely to qualify. Most new arrivals now pay under Portugal's standard progressive tax brackets, which run up to 48%, offset in part by Portugal's roughly 80 double taxation treaties that prevent the same income from being taxed twice. Put the visa thresholds next to the rent data, and the housing pressure stops being an abstraction. One analysis frames it directly. Lisbon rents now run above 167% of the national minimum wage, the second worst ratio of any capital city in the EU. Even outside the city center, rent alone can consume virtually all of a minimum wage worker's net income. And the D7's income floor, €920 a month, is pegged to that same minimum wage, meaning the visa built for financially self-sufficient retirees sets its bar exactly at the income level Portuguese housing analysts already flag as unable to cover rent in this city. Put rough numbers on two composite residents to see how this plays out month to month. A local administrative worker earning close to the Lisbon average, say €1,800 gross, takes home somewhere around €1,400 net after tax and social security. A one-bedroom outside the city center at €1,000 already claims over 70% of that. A foreign remote worker on a D8 visa earning the €3,680 qualifying minimum, itself a floor, not a ceiling, can cover the same apartment on roughly 27% of income, leaving room for savings, private insurance, and the co-working membership the local worker never needed to budget for in the first place. Line the two economies up side by side one more time at the end. A Portuguese resident on the city's average local salary spends the majority of it on rent, competes for a shrinking pool of apartments under 25% of their income, and relies on a public healthcare system that is comprehensive but sometimes slow. A foreign remote worker on a D8 visa arrives with an income floor already double the local average, clears most one-bedroom rents with room to spare, pays for private insurance in the first year by legal requirement, and, unless working in a narrow list of qualifying fields, now pays standard Portuguese tax rates just like everyone else. Neither of these is a story about who deserves Lisbon more. It is a story about two income structures colliding inside one rental market, one healthcare registration system, and one set of visa offices, and about a city whose most photographed tram is, every morning, carrying fewer and fewer of the people who actually live along its route. So which number matters more to you? The €3,680 a month a visa requires you to prove, or the €1,631 a month a local resident needs just to stop treading water?